It's important to know the components that make up an Android app. This is why we're going to talk about app components before diving into building the app itself. So the first component is activity. You can think of activity as an app container. Whatever you see in the app, screens, everything visual is contained in an activity. It gets complicated because activity used to be differently used. Back in the old days of beginning of Android development, activity used to represent one screen, and it would also handle the user interactions for that screen. But nowadays it's different. In most modern Android apps, each app has just one activity, which contains all the screens. And those screens handle the user interaction of that screen separately. So the job of an activity has become like this, to host all the screens and the navigation between them. So activities can handle user interaction, but in modern apps, this is not happening anymore. Another important thing about activities is their life cycle. Life cycle of an activity is kind of like day in the life of a person. So just like when a person wakes up, goes to work, comes back home and watches Netflix and sleeps, something like that. Activity lifecycle in a nutshell looks like this. Activity is created, started, and resumed. This is where the activity is visible to the user and is ready to be interacted with. And at some point, the activity is paused, stopped, and then destroyed. And that's where the life cycle of the activity finishes, which also means you won't see the activity anymore. So I'm not going to dive deep into each of these stages, but these stages are managed by the Android OS. So as a developer, you don't have control over when they will happen. And similar to a day in the life of a person, when a person doesn't want to bring work home, we as developers, we need to make sure certain actions are happening at certain stages. For example, when the activity is not visible anymore, is destroyed, we don't want to fetch data from the server and then show it to the user that will not see it anymore. Enough about activity. The next component is UI elements. These are the building blocks of a screen. So the most important ones are layouts, texts, buttons, input fields. That's, for example, when you want to type a message in a chat, images, and many more. The next component, resources. For example, strings. These are static texts that are bundled with the app. For example, translated text that is going to be shown on the screen. Icons, images, videos, and animations. These are also bundled with the app. Themes and colors, which we will get to them as well later. And fonts, if you happen to want to use custom fonts. Otherwise, the default font doesn't need to be shipped with your app. Other components, Android manifest. It tells the Android OS what your app is about, what permissions does it need, and what is it capable of. So it declares a few things, for example, your app name and icon, the permissions that your app needs, the activities that the app exposes to the Android OS, and many more. It very much depends how complex your app is. In that case, you need to declare more things in the manifest. And keep in mind that a more complex app will have more components. Enough talking about the components, let me show you where they are. So first of all, in this project window, I set it to Android view. I will explain later a bit why. But I set it to Android view, and when I open this app folder, you can see, first of all, manifest. There are possibilities to have more than one manifest files. This is the main manifest of this app. This is how it looks like. It's written in XML. And by the way, most of those resources that we talked about are written in XML. And the activity is here. So if you open the Kotlin Java, you can see the main activity here is written in Kotlin. We will come back to this later, what this means. The resources are here. So for example, drawable. These can be icons, but in this case is the background of the icon of the app. Mipmap, these are the actual icons of the app. You can see there are multiple of them for different resolutions. In the values folder, we have colors, as you see, strings, the static text that we talk about, this is the app name, and themes. If you set this to project view, it can be sometimes hard to find things. For example, the manifest is a bit deep in the hierarchy, is here. Mainly, it's easier to use Android view. So yeah, that's it about app components. And the key takeaway is that the key components of this Android app are activity, UI elements, resources, and Android manifest. Now let's go build the app itself.